Okay, we should start. It's a very great pleasure to welcome Nasrine Seraji, who was for a number of years here a very respected and admired teacher. Nasrine was a student at the AA and then founded her office in Paris, where shortly before she came to us, she was recruited by Alan Balfour in, I think, 1993. She had designed the temporary American, whatever it was called, the American House.
Center?
What?
Center?
The temporary American Center, yes. Found a lot of good that did us. I mean, it'd be difficult to say things like, you know, the American Cultural Center. Nasrine then came and taught in diploma. She's recently completed a number of housing complexes in Paris and in Vienna, and she did the extension to the Lille School of Architecture, which is due for completion in 2006. As I say, she taught from 1993 till later in the 90s at the AA, before going to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, where she had a professorship. She is currently, as I'm sure you know, professor and chair of the architecture department at Cornell University. Olivia published an About Six series pamphlet recently, Nasrine Seraji, Architecture as Territory. I'd like you to welcome Nasrine Seraji.
Okay, that's the end of the show now. Thank you, Mark. And it's really a pleasure to be back. It's been quite a while that I was back at the AA and at this podium, at least 4 times. This is, I think, the 5th. And it's an interesting moment to be at podiums because sometimes you're talking about your own work, sometimes you're talking about others' works. And the first time that I gave a lecture at the AA, it was Mark that introduced me, actually. After the lecture, he congratulated me for not having started with images. And he said, "You're probably the only architect that I know that can speak for about 7 minutes without immediately turning those days, I think that was still slide projectors." And so when he invited me for this lecture, he said that he didn't actually say, it was I think in one of the emails, maybe it was Belinda that had written it, that we're going to give our AV people a night off. So I really took that seriously, and I thought, you know, they're not going to be here. So I really took my computer in order to work on the train, realizing that in 2.5 hours these days it's not that much time to work, whereas in my 14-hour travels to Cornell there's a lot of time to work. Anyhow, I really tried to keep my promise. I'm not going to show you any slides because I'm not going to be talking about my work tonight. For once, I'm giving my work a holiday. On the other hand, I am going to talk about my work because I'm going to be talking about teaching, which is really part and parcel of me and the work of my practice. Often I am asked whether, if it was really up to me, which one would I choose? And I say it is up to me, and I have chosen really both practicing and teaching, even though for the past 4 years I haven't been teaching that much. I have the glorious title of professor, which actually happened in Vienna. I became a professor, and it's very important because even when you build, they write professor on the panels that they put up on your buildings. You know, it's very important to be a professor and build as opposed to just an architect. So I think that I've always refused to read things, but especially when I talk about my work, and here I'm going to be talking about my teaching, but not my teaching in general, but also its relationship with practice of architecture. And therefore I'm going to read things, but there are some quotes, there are some of my own quotes, and it's basically my reflection in the past 18 years of my teaching that I'm sort of opening up to you. I've never given a lecture on pedagogy of architecture. I was supposed to do this last year at MIT, until I found out that it was a real sort of show as opposed to a real discussion on the idea of pedagogy. Let me just tell you, for those of you that looked as you were finding your seats, not why I put those pictures up, but what they really were. Of course, it was a way of getting to know the campus at Cornell when it's beautiful and sort of September days. Believe me, it's gray and cold and about 7 feet of snow in the middle of winter. It's probably now. That's why I've left for about a month. But also because of the fact that when I went to Cornell, I made a pact with myself, and that was that I need to bring back Cornell's vitality that once there was in the 70s and sort of died away. I think it was Peter Cook in one of his articles that said that it was actually when he was writing about the AA in the sort of the AA of the 70s, or the AA of the 60s rather, when he was here, that schools have ins and outs. We all know that, and Cornell had a very, very important years in the 70s. And when I arrived there, the whole of the faculty and many of the students that in fact were very, very new because they weren't there in the 70s, they weren't even born in the 70s, were under the impression that the school was still in its place as it was in the 70s. 70s it was very important because of course it was Colin Rowe and Ungers that were running the school. I'll go into that later on. And the pact that I made with myself was not so much to put Cornell on the map again, because it's a sort of a oxymoronic thing, because it's an Ithaca, and you can't really put it on the map. As I say, everybody says, well, you're going to New York. No, I'm not going to New York. Manhattan's only 6.5 hours away from Europe. Once you get off, then you still have another 4 hours. And that's only if you drive. If you want to be brave and take the plane, then you're in for another 6 hours. So it wasn't really a matter of putting it on the map. It was a matter of sort of stirring it up in order for discussion to happen again. Because I think that if there's been one thing in my life that I have understood through this place, is that architecture is about discussion and debate. And there was no debate at Cornell. There had been some debate. And so it was very important to stir up the place and bring in some sort of destabilizing matters into the place, such as younger faculty, such as people that are on the make, not have made it already, such as people that promise an amazing amount of potential, which I suppose once you've gone through the education of Alvin Boyarsky, you can't really forget, because of the fact, and this is not nostalgia, but it is a fact that it becomes a constructive part of your architectural memory in a way. And so I thought if you bring in people that would begin to disturb, perhaps that disturbance would allow for intellectual conflicts to arrive. Intellectual conflicts for me equals debate and critique. And therefore, this day that you saw really is a day whereby the students don't present the projects, but in fact, the faculty present the projects of the students. And for once, they actually go on the pedestal, if you like, of defending themselves. Since we are in a university situation whereby the reviews, there are exams, of course there are reviews, but a day where everybody at every level discusses the matter of architecture doesn't happen, and it becomes very, very formal in terms of a review and a jury day. It was very important to do this. And there was a lot of resistance to this for about 2 or 3 years. And finally, I think this year, or last year in fact, last spring, we had the breakthrough, and it's something that everybody looks forward to. And I thought it would be the only way that I could introduce very simply the work that I have achieved, at least in the past 3 years. It's not much, but it is quite a bit in terms of at least debate. So I will start by saying that architecture has been and continues to be a respondent to a complex mixture of many disciplines, but most importantly, it is about construction, in the large sense of the word, of course. Architecture is in constant dialogue with philosophy. It is in love with sociology and psychology. It has a complex and suspicious relationship to economic constraints. It is the friend, but considers itself always superior to all the other arts. It is a provocateur. Architecture likes to converse with all these disciplines though it is very hard to use them directly. As Peter Collins put it brilliantly by saying that all which disciplines could bring to architecture would be analogies and perhaps ideas. These other disciplines are not form givers. The first architects were the best stonemasons of Mesopotamia and Egypt. They were also in charge of waterworks and infrastructures. It is important to look at the origin of the name architect in different cultures and languages. The Greeks and the Romans are perhaps the first that gave the architect the responsibility of both a learned man in techniques and in the arts. Teaching of architecture, like the other arts, started with apprenticeship and transfer of technique from master to disciple. It is the Beaux-Arts in the late 19th century that takes the lead in defining architectural education and the architectural profession. Then, the AA is founded by young apprentices, architects as a critical response to the absence of architecture education in England of the time, other than the lectures of architects such as Sir John Soane. The Bauhaus follows. Gropius combines the disciplines of architecture, painting, and sculpture together. He believed that the architect is in charge of coordination, and all coordination needs collaboration, and collaboration starts with the knowledge and therefore the respect of one another. The architect should learn about these other disciplines. Most of the Western education of architecture is based on 3 schools as a principle, at least according to me. The French may not agree with this. The project, or what one calls, the project is a very, very new term, actually. The project as the projet, as the project as that thing which is about the intention. And which the word design, if one goes back to its root in Old English, at least, it meant intention as well. The word project or design is the centerpiece of architectural education. The project or design has become the basis. It is a common ground for discussions and debate on architecture. It is also a testing ground for judgment. It is highly specific. The medical and law professions are also case-based and highly reliant on jurisprudence. Where architecture differs is that every case is a highly individual case. Therefore, the idea of a generic architecture is highly questionable and problematic. The datascape discussions and the architecture that are not concerned with the physical and the psychological context and concerned only with the objective data are as suspicious as the theories, if one can call them theories, that are resulted from them. A great deal of attention has been given to pseudo-objectivity of data these recent years. Since data is such a changing matter, by the way, I love the name data when it comes to, what is the name of this American series when they go up in the space, this guy that knows everything. But you know, that's about somebody who has all the objective data. What is it called?
Star Trek.
That's right, thanks. Star Trek, not the next generation or something like that? Yeah, it is. Star Trek was the first one, right? Captain Kirk, and then it's next generation, right? Data comes to be the next generation, right? So, and coming back to data, since data is such a changing matter, how objective can the data be? If every project has to be about flow, we may soon all be too seasick to draw. But who needs drawings? The recent reliance of architecture on an objective justification is coming to a dead end. The digital condition has been the red herring for many formal manipulations. The architectural object is moving towards a scaleless monotony. A landscape looks like a roof of a museum, and the roof looks like a garage, and a garage looks like a hotel, and etc. Even if we believe that architectural form is not specific to a type, we cannot accept a method applied to all forms. The architecture of the box is boring, though it may pretend that it is flexible. The only contemporary architect who has dealt with the digital condition in an intelligent manner is perhaps a certain Rem Koolhaas, by trying to understand it through other disciplines and its implications, not through its representational capacities. Or another person, which would be very interesting for me to look at, is Bernard Cache, whose work of his studio, Objectile or Objectiles, is concerned really with the philosophy of construction and fabrication of non-standard through standardization. He does not call up NASA to design a teapot, and investigates the notion of rapidity in fabrication in order for it to deal with the problem of the architect, the price, in economics. Architecture is at the critical point, or perhaps a crossroad, which way to turn and what position to take is of high urgency. Many young architects are in the search of a place in the big book of history, though most reject history without any knowledge of it. History is a fundamental gauge, a reference to things past and things forward. Even though our famous Le Corbusier also comes across as rejecting history, but when he says, "Believe me, I who have seen Athens," he's taking Athens as the witness of architecture. To be able to invent, you need to see and know a lot. The modern ideas of space are no longer capable of describing our contemporary world. The past 30 years have produced more change than any other time in history. The word space has been extended throughout our lives. Space of publicity, space of work, space of politics. The overuse of the word space has reoriented the way we think about space. It has been both banalized and valorized at the same time. Our understanding of new spatial conditions demand new definitions. How can architecture respond to the borrowing of terms so familiar to its vocabulary? Marketing use of space, of leisure, Rolex watch advertisement using of architects of time, digital worlds, use of firewalls, etc. Perhaps architecture needs to rethink its ambitions and goals. Schools around the world are struggling with new projects and topics, mostly infatuated with the architect's impotence in changing the world. The ideal power of the architect is lost to all its neighboring disciplines. Installations and temporary event structures attract more attention and money, by the way, than good buildings. But what is a good building? Perhaps it is a building that opens up a true debate on our times. Perhaps it allows the public to rethink the way they occupy and inhabit, or perhaps it is a building that creates jurisprudence, as Deleuze would have said, because nothing is worth anything if there is no jurisprudence about it. A novel idea can only exist if it changes conventions. In fact, jurisprudence, I don't know if it's the right word in English or not, but the only way that one can distinguish an idea is through jurisprudence, and it is through the idea becomes alive when it actually creates and breaks and creates a new convention. A novel idea can only exist if it changes conventions. We are a culture of wear and tear, consumers at speed, no time for reflection, constantly on the move. Wallpaper magazine is the reality of a desired lifestyle. Should we give up architecture, or should architects stop and think? What is architecture? And consequently, what is that we should teach these days? An architect needs to construct a method of practice. All great architects have done so. And the singularity of their method is what history has retained as an exemplar. There are teachers of a method and teachers of methods. There are architects that apply the same method to all types of projects as if there were a need for a pattern. And there are architects who redesign the method each and every time according to the context of the project. The latter is more of a burden, but perhaps the only way to change conventions. Teaching. 15 years have passed since I first started teaching. I have been extremely fortunate to have some 650 students that I have conversed with. At least 3 of them are in the room tonight, or at least 3 of them that I can see. And these students are all over the world. They are all independent thinkers. None of them has learned a method or a style. They have all learned to want architecture eagerly through ideas. An idea remains and a style dies. Projects that we have worked on have been varied. From a house to a city, the scales of these projects have taught my students to be practitioners, researchers, and teachers. They're all architects. An architect distinguishes himself or herself by the depth and breadth of his or her knowledge. The education of the architect encompasses many disciplines. Though, as Bruno Taut pointed out, with all due appreciation, not respect, only appreciation of Le Corbusier, his great weakness lies in the fact that he is not an architect alone, but an abstract painter as well, and that in consequence, he confounds the problems of building with that of studio painting. This problem, of course, would not have existed before the 1750s, since painting and sculpture were not isolated arts, but specific to an edifice. What was an architect and what is an architect? Up until the 19th century, the object of architectural work was not restricted in scale or format. It was broadly understood as painting, sculpture, infrastructures, engineering, and city planning. The architect was considered a learned universalist. According to Plato, architects were not workmen, but directors of workmen, exactly the same thing that Gropius thought much, much later. And they contributed knowledge, not craftsmanship. In ancient Greece and Egypt, this knowledge embraced qualities such as learning and gift of invention. It is enough to look at the first Greek architect, Daedalus, to see the scope of the work of the ancient architect. Today, of course, this is a questionable debate altogether. The architect is no longer a learned man, or at least in 90% of the cases, and our contemporary world does not allow for it anyway. The architect still has a social duty, and that it is to make the public aware of the environment that we live in. Some construct it, some renew the constructed environment, some comment on it, and others transfer their knowledge in order for architecture to go on forever. Practice. 20 years of experimental practice have taught me to resist many temptations. Debate is the center of our atelier. I talk about the projects until all my collaborators, that I call the kids, ask me to return to my office and come back later when they have done more models of all that I have talked about. I don't know why I call them kids, actually. They're all, they are all about 20 years younger than me, I suppose that's why. As builders of sacred buildings, to house the gods, the ancient architect had great status as learned man. Entrusted with prerogative to delve into sacred, became the most powerful administrators of the land. Today, architects have in the best cases, have the status of pop singers. Though neither so well known nor so rich, perhaps Brad Pitt will change this for all of us now that he goes to hear Ram's lectures and works for Gary. The only way young architects can practice today is to market themselves either with odd names or with odd shapes. No naming, neither oddities are permitted in my paper. Believe me, there are other ways. The architect is a respondent to society. Since there are not many questions asked, it is incumbent on the architect to ask the question and answer them too. No project asks any serious questions. After 20 years, I can sign that if you like. Any commissions for museums, art galleries, and music halls, and event spaces than any other building type. Whereas in Hellenistic times, there was no division between civic buildings, engineering, and city planning. Today, if you are a name architect, you have the commission for the most important building and the highest fees and the highest budget per square meter. If you're not so well known, but are trying very hard to become one, you have the right to smaller, but still consequent civic buildings. If you're a good architect who is not interested in being talk of the town, you only design housing and more domestic programs. I just pronounced myself a good architect, by the way. When Herodotus first used the term architekton in the 5th century BC, he applied it to both builders of civil and religious architecture and figures like Opalinos, who devised an underground canal to bring water to Samos. Today, only if you prove that you have landscape capacities or a degree, then you would be consulted as an architect to work on water canals, and only perhaps. Unfortunately, the division of knowledge and the specialization of fields have given the architect a handicap. There are no more educational nor economical possibilities for the likes of Alberti today. Nor do we need Albertis today, really. Is this a problem? Perhaps not. An open question for all of us who continue to be architects. I'm going to read a quote to you, and it would be good if you could name that tune in 3, in 4, I don't know, in however many you like. The architect should be equipped with knowledge of many branches of study and varied kinds of learning. This word is going to give it up. For it is by his judgment that all work done by the other arts is put to the test. This knowledge is the child of practice and theory. Practice is the continuous and regular exercises of employment where manual work is done with any necessary material according to the design of a drawing. Theory is the ability to demonstrate and explain the productions of dexterity on the principles of proportion. Second word that should have given it up. An architect ought to be both naturally gifted and amenable to instruction. Let him be educated, skillful with the pencil, instructed in geometry, know much history, have followed the philosophers with attention. By the way, on the geometry thing, it's interesting because somebody like Bernard Cache says that until we have not resolved the problem of geometry, we're going to have orthogonal buildings. And we're going because the most economical thing, and this is a guy that has been working with Deleuze for at least 10 years before he died, plus the fact that he's been really seriously working at the problem of geometry through the digital condition. And it's interesting that he only works with surfaces. And it's interesting that he only works with surfaces that could perhaps give the possibility of being reproduced in a standardized manner. Going back to our good old Vitruvius, know the opinions of jurists and be acquainted with astronomy and the theory of heavens. So, and finally, did you know, this is not the finality of the talk, by the way, that the first school of architecture was the Royal Academy of Architecture in France. It was to train architects in the principles of architecture for the royal building administration. Its focus was on theoretical matters, its learning methods via discussion of specific problems, and this through a critical discourse, but through concrete questions, examples, and issues. Principles of academic training published by François Blondel, first director of the Royal Academy, in 1675, set the groundwork for architectural education in Europe up to the 19th century. Persisting to the 20th century in the Beaux-Arts program, and still persisting, by the way, but after 68 something went wrong. First effort to formally circumscribe the work of the architect, including fee structures, dates back only to 1834, with the creation of the Institute of British Architects. So in the fee structure, at least the RIBA was first, not in the education of the architect. Later, Royal Institute of British Architects in 1866. found that for facilitating the acquirement of architectural knowledge, for the promotion of different branches of sciences connected with it, and for establishing an uniformity and respectability of practice in the profession. In France, the architecture program of the Royal Academy was reopened after the French Revolution under the new name of Ecole des Beaux-Arts, counterpart to the then newly formed Ecole Polytechnique, which was for the engineers, which taught architecture to engineers at the time, and then it became the School of Engineers. The relationship between the two schools was not so much oppositional as complicit in reflecting a reification of architectural knowledge into art and science, aesthetics and engineering, and/or planning in the 19th century. Epilogue. The industrial model of knowledge and production has run its course. Under new epistemological, technological, and economic conditions, the disciplinary distinctions enforced by the professional organizations of the late 19th, early 20th centuries for economic as well as technical reasons are becoming increasingly untenable and are commonly transgressed in practice. The work of Rem Koolhaas really demonstrates this perfectly. The question remains as to how architectural education could better accommodate, if not contribute, leadership in this new context. What seems at stake is not so much a return to the universalist model of knowledge or practice of the pre-industrial era, where one individual encompasses the multidisciplinarity in him, and therefore he is the man or he is the god, and him, we can't really say her at that time or herself. And anyway, I'm not in America, so I don't have to be politically correct, as a new formation of interdisciplinarity. So this new formation of interdisciplinarity, I think, is very, very important to see, to sort of dissect this thing and see what it is, why is it that everybody is so infatuated with this, and how can architectural education really contribute to this? We need to teach students to be multidextrous. History needs to be taught seriously, not as a basic course, but as a building material, as painting needs to be taught not only to bring polychromy in buildings, but as a dynamic force that allows for the changing of forms. Students of architecture should read newspapers and to be politically aware and conscious. Theory can only exist if architects produce architecture. The culture of analysis will die. Theory of architecture, not other theories. The culture of analysis will die if there remains nothing to analyze. The Architecture d'Aujourd'hui published a dossier on the AA. I don't know how many of you have actually read this. I think if you haven't, please do, because it's, I read it just recently again, and it's extremely important. In its issue, number 314, if you want to note it down, the year that I decided to leave the AA, the same year I turned 40, now you know how old I am, December 1997. You can calculate it if you like. The article was called Architectural Association, a School, but it was subtitled A House, a Club, an Empire. 1847 to 1917, which was the foundation of the AA, which the article discusses as the, the sort of the movement of the position of the architect as the gentleman architect, and talks about the birth of the association and the invention of a school. Its recognition in, I believe it was 1855. 1917 to 1945, the article basically calls it the modern epoch, or the modern times. The fact that Architectural Association moves to Bedford Square, and what happens and how the issue of avant-garde comes to the Architectural Association, and how the Architectural Association, right after the war, of course, deals with social architecture, and how it deals with what one calls revolt, or not revolt in English, but rebellion, in fact, in English, révolte in French, through architecture. And how the Architectural Association is in constant dialogue, as in constant questioning of the issues at stake. 1945 to 1971, which is called the Alternatives, is basically talking about the centenary, and there's a very, very interesting moment about against austerity, brutalism, vitalism, minimalism, which is the introduction of people like Peter Smithson, and of course the Pop City, which brings in Peter Cook to the scene. and the alternative challenges, which starts really by showing how the AA, this is of course just before the years of Alvin, how the AA is beginning to relook at the city the same way that London is beginning to, in fact, pronounce itself as a totally different metropolis than any of the other cities. 1971 and 1990 is subtitled a very, very interesting word. It's the Tsar and the Stars. So in fact, if you turn the words around, it's written with the same letters. And it's the Tsar being Alvin, of course, and the creation of stars at the Architectural Association. Of course, through creating what Alvin himself used to call creating an atmosphere, what Alvin used to call that that's why this place is called a house, and it's a club, and at the end of the day it's an empire, because through an atmosphere you can create an empire. And how Alvin started to bring in new blood in order for the AA to become this alternative. And then at the end of that, incest triumphs, of course. And what happens is that, as Alvin used to say himself, it's like fish. You take them from one pond to the other, and the whole place becomes this fantastic fish pond. And that's what the AA really is about. The new epoch has arrived. This article interests me very much, the one in the Architecture d'aujourd'hui, because it is written by a former architect and now a well-known writer and critic. It is a cross-section of the life of the AA, even through its titles. It has a brilliant plan, and its content is both informative, beautifully articulated, and handsomely illustrated. What more does one want from an architect, even if it's a former architect? 2005, we're not there yet, soon we will be there. The era of the digital technology and the search for a new chairman. Universities in the US are corporate companies in disguise of intellectual theaters. The policy in the United States is to headhunt. There is an odd feeling of unease. No one knows who the shortlist is until they are brought to campus for a presentation to those who have no choice but to accept the president and the provost's choice. All faculty and students are asked to send in their thoughts on the candidates. But this is just form. It is a protocol. One can call it a decorum. The AA produces a lot of form. I was part of it as well. I produced a lot of form here. But it is about content and content. It's no joke that the most eminent architect of our times, here it is again, Ram, has called his last big comic strip magazine Content. At the AA, though the students and staff discuss their views, they argue about it, they fight about it. They fight about it, they argue about it. We argued about it until very late times in the night. I don't know if Pascal he is here, but I will never forget the 1 o'clock at night. I think Carlos was at that table as well. We argue. But then we vote. They vote on it. It is a democracy, even though autocratic at times. The Beaux-Arts was ruled out by the '68 generation. Bauhaus was demolished by the Nazis. Harvard gave place at the same time to Gropius, who had said, when starting the Bauhaus, that the only way that an architect could make a dent in history would be through making a school. IIT invited Mies to construct half of Chicago. The school has not as yet been able to rid itself of the ghost of Mies. Mies would have been designing a new computer program to do justice to his constructions if he was alive today. The IIT students are still struggling with the Bauhaus exercises of how to hold the pencil in such a way that it draws the same thickness of line from start to end. Columbia invited Bernard Tschumi, who exported the AA to New York City, where no one knew that the Canadian Czech had done it already in London when Tschumi was a student. The 70s were the glorious years of the AA and Alvin Boyarsky, Cornell with Colin Rowe and Ungers, Cooper and Haydock, all formerly known as the Texas Rangers, having students such as Don Bates, whom later on studied with Libeskind, who was directing the program at Cranbrook in Michigan, who was no longer teaching at the AA, having left it after having taught with Dalibor Vesely, who had Mohsen Mustafavi as his tutor in the late 70s. After all, the world is a big place, but the world of architecture is very, very small. And even if we all know one another, we compete against one another, since there just isn't enough building mass to be produced by all of us. A school of architecture needs to reach out and open its horizons. It should give the possibility to its students to infiltrate the world and to contribute to more than just building matter. We need to educate architects to be mayors, politicians, graphic publicists, prime ministers, and perhaps even architects. There is no place better than home, and thank you for inviting me to share my love for architecture and its pedagogy.
Okay. Can we open it to questions?
Go on, Mike.
Okay.
I gave you a hard time. Give me a hard time.
Okay. Your talk was very engaging in many ways, but you did talk about multidisciplinarity. But specifically, you seem to be focused on what and I'm a former student at Dalibor. You seem to be specifically focused on that kind of old phenomenological approach that painting, sculpture, those kind of arty things are somehow still central to architecture. Does that deliberately exclude kind of other areas, such as biology, mathematics, physics, and so on?
No, it doesn't. It's just that it's a way of breaking the convention of constantly talking about biology, about physics, about chemistry, about all the other disciplines. Of course, they are, as I said right at the beginning of my talk, I think all of these disciplines are important to architecture, because at the end of the day, architecture deals with the when I say social responsibility, it's not so much that we have to be worried about, how much space we give to the poor or this or that. It is that we are in constant dialogue with those that preoccupy really the problem of man, the problem of public, the problem of our world. So, environment, the ozone layer, is something that concerns the architect as well.
That sounds like a recipe for being new Vitruvians.
I don't know if we can really, because there's so much specialization. I mean, when you work on a large project these days, when you work on an urban project which, a sort of territorial scale, which deals with 300, 400, 500 hectares of land, you can't be a universalist. It's impossible. On the other hand, there are ways that the architect needs to be equipped to be able to deal with those issues, because at the end of the day, we still are people that have to synthesize things. And therefore, there's an interesting thing that has happened, at least in my sort of experience of a teacher, and not so much an administrator really, but a teacher, is that we have, in the past 10, 15 years, been obsessed with this thing called analysis. And sometimes I sort of, not force, but ask my students sometimes to sort of work with the project as an inverse analysis. What if one started to actually break the project apart as opposed to, and then analyze it and come back to a methodology of designing? Because first you have to design. And it's not to just design anything, because those ones that start designing too fast, I stop them. On the other hand, I think that it's not a problem of universalism. It's not a problem of everybody, one man knowing everything. But it is how one, in a school of architecture, in the realm of pedagogy, we can actually best prepare this. Now, the AA, in a funny way, because of the fact that we've had always a situation of confrontation in terms of the different ways of thinking of the different units, we have always allowed for that to happen. I'm not sure, I don't know what's been going on in the past 4 or 5 years. It's not that that I didn't really want to be sort of part of the place, it's just that I've been more part of airports than anything else. But I don't know what's been going on, with the exception of, some of the units, for instance, works, specifically the graduate school, I don't know what's going on in the other units. I don't know what sort of engagement we have, with the exception of, for instance, the work of Carlos that I know in his unit, and through some students that have been in his unit in the past, that I've known, or and so I don't know how we are right now at the AA dealing with what is happening out there in terms of projects, in terms of ambitions, in terms of what are we doing with the Asian growth. What is happening in terms of, whether it is here or any other school of architecture, how are we questioning the problems that architects are dealing with? Not all architects, but there's on one side you have Beijing that is being built up by the most corporate architects of America, of England, of France, of whoever you want. Andro, one of them, is corporate, and also his buildings come down. But there are very, very few REMs that are dealing with questions. There are very few people that actually go and make it their business to become, sort of to go on the board of the conservationists in Beijing, sort of preservationists. I mean, could anybody imagine that Rem would be on a board of preservation of the city? Why? Why is it that he's exploding the practice of architecture in the way that he is? And therefore, how these debates could become part and parcel of that intention, that design, that project that I was talking about, and how can one bring that to become the center or the ethos of the place is important, I think. Not just somebody, Marcel Gaucher, who's an intriguing, I think, probably one of the last sort of philosophers that exist these days in a sort of an interestingly sort of pure intellectual in France still, is talking about a very, very interesting model, and is talking about the fact that schools in France have a lot of problems, not only schools of architecture, but the state-run school. And he does have a very, very intriguing idea, I think, for me as a model, but a philosopher again, in terms of the way that one can use the different capacities and autonomies. If each school is known for one specific good thing, how one can bring those around the world together, and through what interface. Now that, as a model, it's not there because it's just it's just ethereal right now. It's an idea, but I mean it's something that interests me, intrigues me, to see how a school of architecture could, for instance, allow for that to become, not for it to have everything in itself, but how can it create an interface which those links could be made to those places. So because of the fact that we don't have the recognition of the limits exactly as we did in the 19th century. So there are questions that I'm asking. I don't have the answers to them. It's been a perpetual question for me in the past 15 years in terms of both education. It's a project, so the intentions are there. I don't have answers for them, but I don't know if that helps with the discussion.
Question?
As someone who's been both inside the AA and now outside of the AA, like I think pretty much all of our speakers these 2 weeks, could you possibly identify what it is you think the AA can do that's inimitable to its kind of both structural kind of capability, but also its sort of psychological makeup? Specifically, let's say, in respect to, I think a lot of the discussions and debates over the last 2 weeks have reminded us that, you know, we're not, we can't be deluded that we're kind of A, unique, or B, number one necessarily anymore. Maybe we were once, you know, and so forth. But the process of kind of dissipation and copy-pasting.
I think we are still. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well.
And I say we are. It's not sort of making it. It's not. I think that the structure of the AA, at every time of its existence, has been unique, and it is still. As somebody who has been the head of an art and architecture school in Vienna, you know, university, social structure, hierarchical, independent, nevertheless, you know, it's an academy. It's not really a university structure. As somebody who has taught in a university situation in America, has taught Princeton, Columbia, and is now heading, you know, a chair of the Department of Architecture as an administrator, not as a teacher now. The AA is still unique. The AA is still that place. I said, I don't know what is going on right now in the units. If I knew, maybe I would not say that, but I think I would still say it. Because the structure of the place is unique in the sense that the chairman has had, or at least Alvin installed this thing as an autocratic place. But autocratic meaning what? Meaning that one person that would not allow for the structure that he had put into place to be meddled with the external forces, such as the council, for instance. He made it his business. Now, another chairman may not want to do that, or another administration, you know, somebody who heads the place may not want to do that. It is unique because of the fact that there are, in the first year, there are still 3 units or 5 units? 3 units? 4. In the intermediate school, there are, I don't know how many units, 10, 12 units. In the diploma school, 14, 17, when diploma unit 1 is not here on sabbatical, no sabbatical. There is no sabbatical at the AA, you know. Oh, thank God for that. Because it basically pushes you into a cupboard, and the only thing that you don't do in your sabbatical is to write, in fact.
The cupboard would be fine.
You want one, right? No, but I'm serious about this because of the fact that it allows you to constantly be hyper in a situation that you have to make, as a teacher here, you have to practice your business, however you're practicing. It doesn't matter whether you're building a house every 3 years or you're building big things, or, you know, you have to make a very specific structure in order for that practice to work. And the AA has the sort of the suppleness in a way and the fluidity in order to absorb either a rigorous way of dealing with things or something which has its own inherent structure. So it is unique still as a structure. Now, it may not be unique in terms of the production, but why is it not unique in terms of its production? Because everybody else is seeing exactly that thing that was produced here. And therefore, it doesn't seem any longer in the world of image that we are. And it's very important to realize what sort of a condition we're in right now in terms of everything, that the interfaces that are around us. Therefore, it doesn't appear, or it is not perceived any longer as a unique place. Why is it? Because you have an AA Australia, you have an AA New York, why is it? Because the AA has exported its structure. Now, it has exported structure, but yet there are fundamental differences. That's why I think it's very, very important, the locality, not only just being in Bedford Square, the fact that it is in London, the fact that it is both a place that introduces itself to the outside of this city, not only, you know, the outside world. So it is still unique. I don't think that it's not, you know, I don't think that it's the same as other schools. The second part of your question was what to do for it to become what?
I think it's obvious. We know there are certain structural kind of properties to us that make us unique. Mm-hmm. But the question is surely then, given that that's a kind of a special kind of power, as it were, what should we do with that special power that we can only inimitably do, that no one else can do with that, as it were?
Well, it's not that no one else can do, because once you do it, everybody else, you can't keep the secrets. Once you do it, it's gonna, it's like designing something. You're putting it out there. You can't stop it from being copied. The best works of architecture have been copied, in a good way or in a bad way. So what can we do? What is to be done? I think that the AA has to make it its business to be alternative again. Alternative in the sense to go onto the other side, and making it its business to begin to discover those things that are really, really at stake right now in the world of architecture and the world of practice. And by that, I don't mean to sit down and sort of draw 1 to 10 details of anything, in the large sense of the word. The same way that when London became, in the 60s, the hip place, the cool place, the place that it was creating this business of another metropolis, London has a very, very specific position right now as a city. It's neither an American city, American in terms of its governance, nor is it a European city. It's right in the middle of something. Now, what that means architecturally could be the business of the AA. What it means in terms of its place, that is constantly moving from one stone to another, one place to another, could be the business of the AA. What it is in terms of the alternative discoveries of, everybody thinks about landscape and urbanism today, not in the same way, but at least in the sort of same fields. Yeah? Perhaps there are places that one can begin to investigate and go in the sort of, if you like, the counterclockwise in order for those to become new conventions. I think that the AA should right now resist all those things that it has put out itself, and is the master of it now. Throughout the times, not only in the past 10, 15 years, but throughout the time, and re-look at itself. That's why I'm serious. I mean, read this article. It has made me think. I mean, it was written when I was still here, but it made me think of the way that the AA could operate again. Not operate again, it's operating already, but operate in terms of, in an alternative way. And, I don't have sort of you have to do this, this, this. I cannot articulate what it is, because a project you can't articulate what it's going to be. Otherwise, you're going to be a formalist. You're going to say, I want it to look like this. And so you do it and then you leave. I work with a project not that way. I work with a project that through a series of discussions, through a series of problems, through a series of deletions, you come up with the answer. Now, your question being more sort of geared towards how one expect of a new leader for the place, I don't know. I really don't know. I think it has to be somebody that needs to give the AA, give its community the capacity of re-becoming an alternative, creating a jurisprudence, creating another convention. This convention needs to be, and it's going to be painful, but because it's going to have to look at itself. And look at itself not only through, this is fantastic, to be able to bring in people that have been in and out, and to be able to ask them to reflect about what the place was, what the place is, what the place could become. On the other hand, I don't think it's something that one can come up with a magic response to it. Or at least I can't.
Benny.
Benny is still here.
Hi. I went to school in America at Yale University, and the architecture school there, spatially, couldn't be more different from the Architectural Association here. It's a great big expressionist, modernist building where the spaces that the students inhabit and the teaching mostly goes on is a series of big communal, interlocking, open spaces. The AA couldn't be more different spatial kind of situation for a school. The virtues that you've been discussing about the school and its history, do you think they're enhanced by the fact that physically it's very different from the conventional paradigm for an architecture school?
It's an interesting question because I asked myself this question the first time that we were invited to a competition for an architecture school in Tours in 1997 when I was still at the AA. And I don't know if it was here or somewhere else, I gave a lecture on the topic, can the form of an architecture school and its spaces have any consequences on the structure of the teaching, but also the structure of the pedagogy in the school? I think it can, and it does, or at least this is my opinion, because of the fact that this place has made me be what I am in my professional practice and also as a teacher. By virtue of, there was a very interesting thing, and I don't know if you weren't here at that time. But the moment that Alvin decided to put the bar where he did put it, there are some people that are laughing, and I know exactly you know why. Yeah, you know why he did that. The moment that he put the bar there was that nobody, unless they wanted to go out through this way, could avoid to see one another. So even if you had failed somebody's student the night before, you had to face them the next day. And that facing didn't mean that you had to apologize to them, or you didn't have to, you didn't have to sort of say, I'm really sorry, but, I failed 2 of yours, but then afterwards you failed 3 of mine. It wasn't that. It was a matter of confrontation which allowed for everybody to be able to be both friends, but also to be able to criticize one another. Because if you're just friends, and that's exactly the reason that I left. When I left here, we were in the library. And those who remember that night when we finished at 3 o'clock in the morning, where we were bickering about who is going to get the honors that year, I can tell you, I was so disgusted that we could not even bring ourselves to discuss this in a way that we could leave the place and be still friends. Because we were leaving that night and we were all bitter and we didn't want to talk to one another anymore. And for those of you who were there, take me, you are my witness. It was a night that we left here, and I think only those of us who had agreed with one another the next day, we were bitching about the other ones. Now, I think, therefore, a school and the way that it is, that it comes together, the way that it is built, this place had a structure. Alvin made that structure differently. He added things to it, he made the bar, then he started screaming at Rosebud that he didn't want to have, I don't know, the smell of this or the smell of that, because this was not a kitchen, this was, And so, yes, there is a domesticity or a domestic scale to this place, but there is also an institutional scale to it, but there is also a point which it makes in terms of enter the house. You are all part of it, and you have to be part of it because you go up those stairs, and it's exactly as if you were entering it's a Georgian house, but it's the same thing as a Victorian house in a way. It's just a bit, it's like the sort of a female-male version of the corb chair. One is a little bit more sort of open than the other one's tight. So I don't know which one's which, tight or open. It's just but I think it is very important. I think the fact that the day that I realized that I could exist as an architect was the day that I got my diploma. And in fact, Alvin came and gave me a kiss on my cheek and said, now you can be called an architect. Now then I was part of a family. Till then, I was only a student. So that's why he was both an autocrat. At the same time, He was somebody, and I don't, I don't want to go back again, but I think it's very important to have a structure or at least think about it when you're designing it. This is what we just did recently. I didn't want to show images, otherwise I would have shown you the extension of the School of Architecture in Lille that we're doing right now. And as a designer, as an architect, you bring in your practical sort of fantasies, but also your practical desires, but also your practical sort of ways of seeing what a pedagogy could be into a design of a school of architecture, and that's what we've done there. In the school in Lille, for instance, we were showing the faculty rooms, because it's more of a university structure, the faculty rooms as all equal. Now, at Cornell, my room's the biggest one because I'm the chair, you see, and the most beautiful one, even more beautiful than the dean's, by the way. But that's because of the fact that there is a reason for that. It's because of the fact that, structurally speaking, at Cornell, the Department of Architecture was the first one that started the education of architecture after engineering. And that the department head was, I don't want to go back to the 19th century again, but there is a structural interest there. The fact that Ungers was a chair, not Colin Rowe. Colin Rowe invited Ungers. And the fact that Ungers was a chair of a department of architecture, and the dean has mostly, at least in the past, now it's the first time in a long while that the dean is an architect. But the dean, Tony as well, Tony Vidler. But you can't really, he was there only for 6 months, so you can't really qualify him as a dean. But the first time, after a long time, that there is an architect dean. Otherwise, all the deans at Cornell have been planners. All the deans at Harvard have been planners. The deans at Virginia were planners until very recent years, actually. It's a very interesting thing that is happening because all the deans are becoming architects. And why is that? Since 2001, we have had an interest or a pull towards the image of architecture as that thing that has to be as a cultural support for that system in America. And so I think that your question is very pertinent. And yes, it makes this place being so small, so tight, and everybody having to sort of, excuse me, going up the stairs when they're having their portfolios, having to help one another in order to get the portfolio in or out. Sometimes is a hindrance, but a lot of times it's a help.
Even so, those of us who are perhaps slightly psychic can almost hear the sound of furniture being moved in Ithaca as you speak.
What? Mm-mm.
I think the point about
my door key was changed just before I left.
Questions?
Comments? What do you think? Where do you think that the AA should go? Shin, where do you think that the AA should go? You're just sleeping. You still overwork. Sorry, François.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
How can we be critical about a past where a short past, like you make reference to a period of Alvin or maybe Alan and Moisen. Thanks for the pictures of Cornell, by the way. And
you want them back again, by the way?
No, I'm fine. Just how can we be critical about that? Because I think there is a big aura around Alvin, and you make a great deal about history in general, which maybe is more easy for futurists. But how can we do that as well with Alvin?
It's very difficult to efface a good structure. It's very difficult. I don't know. Are you an architect, François?
No, I'm third year. Actually, I finished my third year.
Well, you know, in America, you would have said, as an architect, because as soon as they come into first year, they say, I'm an architect. It's interesting. And I keep on telling them, you're not an architect until you have suffered through something, you know, so wait. You're going to do it soon. But anyway, no, the reason I asked you that is because, you know, when you do renovations, sometimes you come across crappy structures. And it's so easy to just get rid of them, you know. And sometimes you come across very good structures. And no matter how much you want to change the thing, and how much you want to give it your own being, there's something that doesn't let you do it. You know? And it's not rationality or the problem of economics. It's that there is something which is alive, you know, simply. Now, I think there are things that the way that one can be critical is to see the AA exists. It's an existing structure. It's not something that one is going to build from the first day. And if one is to take its recent history, is to really look at it and see what are the best things that one can keep of that recent history. I think that there have been extreme differences in the recent history of these three, Alvin, Alan, and Mawson. You know. Alan has left us with a structure that I don't know how much of it we can change, because this is a perfect structure in terms of debate. He said it himself, that the one thing that he wanted to have was the Jeffersonian idea. Now, what does it mean? It means autonomy, at the same time a public in the sense of the power. So that we have as a principle. I think that it would be wrong to get rid of that, because that's where we feel good every day that we come in here, because we are here in this place our own bosses, both as students, as tutors, or as, you know, as staff that are making this place run, you know. Alan did something which was quite interesting, I think. We were in huge debts. Alvin left, I can't remember what the deficit was, but it was a huge deficit. Nearly £1 million in those days. It would have been about 2.5 million today, I think, with the inflation rate. And with some interesting ideas that weren't only Alan's, but they were people that were around at that time. The place, the school, Alan, circumstances, you know, that he brought that deficit back up to the black. So that was extremely important. I can't remember, it was 3 years that Alan was here, or more, about 3 years. So the school needs a good money base, financial base. And Mawson did some things which I think one cannot just forget, you know. So I think that one thing is to put all the good things on one side, and then look at the problems also on the other side. And then it's it's a weighing in and weighing out exercise. Now, then you're not going to job describe based on those findings for the chairman or the person that is going to run the place. But I think that the short of it all is that the structure of the place needs to remain as it is. I don't know what the number of students are these days. I think that the place needs to have a critical mass of students. It shouldn't go too low down. The fact that this room is filled with students and doesn't have more of a capacity allows the students to choose sometimes they don't have a choice because there's no room, such as when, I don't know, when Rem is here, or maybe tomorrow night even, yeah, when Zaha is going to be here. On the other hand, I don't think that, I really think that the structure is in place. There are a variety of things that one could probably think of that were extremely important that Mohsen did. I don't know if we still have some of the studios, for instance, outside the school or not. But I think that's something which is quite important, not in terms of just the place to work, but also for the point activations of these places. The fact that at the time of Alvin, the AA within itself was this critical place in the city. Now it has these other points. You know, these other points perhaps should even go out more. Now it has also practical problems. That is, you know, you're not really next to the lecture hall, so you can't be drawing or, I don't know, doing something on the computer or reading even and run to the lecture hall. But there are very important structural things that are in place, and I think that those need to be enhanced in a way. Enhanced, and of course, I can't really talk about the future because the future is so, if I could, you know, we would already be there. But I think it's what I was calling the inverse analysis. The project is there. Now we have to dissect it. So an inverse analysis is needed. He's the right person for it, you know. So in terms of analysis, I was talking, not in terms of chairman.
Well, on that miserable note. If there are no more questions on your behalf, I'd like to thank Nasrine very much indeed.